Let me tell you about the day my life changed. It wasn't a good day. Actually, it was probably the worst day of my entire life up until that point. I was sitting in a tiny diner on the edge of town, nursing a cup of coffee I couldn't really afford, staring at a newspaper someone had left behind. The pages were stained with coffee rings and jam, but I read it anyway because I had nothing else to do and nowhere else to go. My name is Sarah, and 3 days before this moment, I'd lost everything. My boyfriend had kicked me out. My job had let me go. I had a backpack full of clothes and about $40 to my name. I was 26 years old, and I felt like my life was already over. That's when I saw it. A small ad in the classified section, just a few lines. Live-in assistant needed for private home. Must be quiet and discreet. Good pay. Call for details. I remember staring at those words for a long time. It felt strange, maybe even dangerous. But what choice did I have? I was already drowning. So I walked to the payphone outside the diner and dialed the number with shaking hands. A woman answered. Her voice was deep and calm, like water flowing over smooth stones. She asked me a few questions. Could I start immediately? Was I comfortable with silence? Did I have anywhere else to go? I answered honestly. Yes, yes, and no. She gave me an address on the outskirts of the city and told me to come the next morning. When I arrived, I almost turned back. The house stood alone on a hillside, surrounded by overgrown gardens and tall trees. It was beautiful in a lonely kind of way, like something from a dream you can't quite remember. I knocked on the heavy wooden door, and she opened it. Her name was Margaret Ross. She was probably in her late 40s, tall and elegant with gray streaks in her dark hair. She wore simple clothes, a white shirt and dark pants, but somehow she looked like she belonged in a palace. Her eyes were gray too, intelligent and sad, and when she looked at me, I felt like she could see right through me. You're Sarah, she said. Not a question. Yes, ma'am, I whispered. She nodded slowly and stepped aside. Come in. The house was enormous and absolutely silent. Our footsteps echoed on the wooden floors. Everything was clean and perfect, artwork on the walls, expensive furniture, but it felt empty, like a museum after closing time. It didn't feel like anyone actually lived there. She led me upstairs and down a long hallway to a room at the very end. She paused with her hand on the doorknob, and for just a second, I saw something in her face. Hesitation, maybe. Or fear. Then she pushed the door open. This is my bedroom, she said quietly. You'll clean it every morning. I stepped inside, and my breath caught. The room was massive, with tall windows overlooking the garden. There was a huge bed with white sheets, a desk covered in books and papers, and more books stacked everywhere. Unlike the rest of the house, this room felt alive. It felt like her. I'll show you where the cleaning supplies are, she continued, her voice flat and businesslike. I expect the bed made, the floors cleaned, everything dusted. But don't touch my books or papers. Don't move anything on my desk. I nodded, too nervous to speak. She walked to the window and looked out at the garden. Her back was to me. I'm here most of the time, she said. I work from home. I won't bother you while you clean, but I'll be in the room. Is that a problem? No, ma'am, I said, though the thought terrified me. Don't call me ma'am, she said, still not turning around. My name is Margaret. I'm not that old. Something about the way she said it made my chest tighten. It was such a small thing, asking me to use her name. But it felt important, like she was trying to close the distance between us, even just a little. Okay, I said softly. Margaret. She finally turned and looked at me. For a moment, something passed between us. Recognition, maybe. Two lonely people seeing each other clearly. Your room is down the hall, she said. Get settled. You can start tomorrow morning. As I walked to my new room, a tiny space tucked under the roof, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Not quite hope, not yet, but maybe the possibility of it. I set my backpack down and sat on the narrow bed. Through the small window, I could see the sun setting over the hills, painting the sky gold and pink. I had a place to sleep. I had a job. It was enough for now. It had to be. The first week was the hardest week of my life. Every morning, I would knock softly on Margaret's door at 8 o'clock. She would call out, "Come in that calm, steady voice, and I would enter with my arms full of cleaning supplies, feeling like an intruder. She was always there, sitting at her desk by the window, typing on her laptop or reading through stacks of papers. She never looked at me directly, but I could feel her awareness. Every move I made felt too loud, too clumsy. The vacuum cleaner sounded like a jet engine. Even my breathing seemed too heavy. I learned to move quietly, to become almost invisible. It was what she wanted, I thought. Silence and discretion. That's what the ad had said. But slowly, without meaning to, I started learning about her. I learned she drank coffee from the same blue mug every morning, and she never washed it herself, just left it on her desk. I learned she read poetry before bed, leaving books open on her nightstand. I learned she had a small scar above her left eyebrow that you could only see in certain light. There was a photograph on her desk, in a silver frame, a younger version of Margaret standing next to a smiling man with kind eyes. I was careful never to touch it, but I wondered about him. I wondered what had happened. The house told me stories too. It was too quiet, too perfect. Every room looked like a photograph in a magazine, but nothing felt warm. Nothing felt loved. It was like Margaret had built a beautiful cage around herself and couldn't figure out how to get out. I understood that feeling. On the 8th day, something changed. I was dusting her bookshelf, being extra careful with the framed photograph, when she spoke without warning. "His name was Daniel," she said quietly. I froze, my heart racing. I hadn't expected her to speak to me. "Not really." "I'm sorry," I stammered. "I wasn't." "It's all right," she said, still looking at her computer screen. "He was my husband. He died 2 years ago." I didn't know what to say. "I'm so sorry" seemed too small. "He was a scientist," she continued, her voice distant. "He studied the ocean. He always said he preferred the company of fish to people." She paused, and I saw the tiniest hint of a smile. I couldn't really argue with that. My throat felt tight. "My dad was a teacher," I offered, the words tumbling out. "He always said he liked books better than people. At least books made sense." Margaret finally turned to look at me. Really look at me. Her gray eyes were soft. A wise man. Something shifted in that moment. It was small, barely noticeable, like a door opening just a crack. But I felt it. From that day on, she spoke to me occasionally. Little comments, small observations. She asked me once where I was from. Another time, she asked if I liked to read. The conversations were brief, but they mattered. And then, 2 weeks after I'd started, she did something that changed everything. I had just finished cleaning. I was putting my supplies away when she stood up from her desk and walked over to me. She was holding her blue coffee mug and a second one I'd never seen before. "Would you like some coffee, Sarah?" she asked. My heart did a strange flip. It was just coffee. Just a simple offer. But it felt like so much more. It felt like an invitation. "Yes," I said quietly. "Thank you." We sat in the 2 chairs by the window, holding our warm mugs, not really talking. The silence wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It was peaceful. Shared. I looked at her profile as she gazed out at the overgrown garden, and I felt something stirring in my chest. Something I didn't have a name for yet. This became our routine. After I cleaned, we would have coffee together. Sometimes we talked about small things, the weather, a book, the birds in the garden. Sometimes we just sat quietly. I started to notice things I shouldn't notice. The way her hair fell across her face when she was concentrating. The way her long fingers wrapped around the coffee mug. The rare moments when she would smile at something I said, and her whole face would transform. I told myself to stop. She was my employer. She was grieving her husband. I was just the help, someone passing through her life. But my heart didn't listen. One afternoon, she asked me if I knew anything about gardens. "Not really," I admitted. "Neither do I," she said, looking out the window at the wild, tangled mess of plants. "But it needs work. Would you help me?" "Of course," I said. We started spending afternoons outside, pulling weeds and trimming branches. We worked side by side, our hands dirty with soil, and talked more freely than we ever had inside. She told me about her work as a university professor before she retired. I told her about my failed dreams of becoming a writer. The walls between us were coming down, brick by brick, and I was falling hard and helpless, into something I knew could break me. It happened on a Tuesday in late September. I'd been living at Margaret's house for almost 2 months, and the rhythm of our days had become comfortable. Wake up, clean her room, share coffee, work in the garden, make dinner together, say goodnight. It was simple and quiet, and I was happier than I'd been in years. But I was also terrified, because I was in love with her. I was in love with the way she listened when I talked, really listened like my words mattered. I was in love with her quiet laugh, the one that sounded rusty, like she hadn't used it in years. I was in love with the way she looked at the world, intelligent and curious and sad. I knew it was hopeless. She was older, wiser, still mourning her husband. And I was just Sarah, the girl she'd taken pity on, someone she'd saved from sleeping on the streets. But my heart didn't care about logic. That Tuesday, dark clouds rolled in fast, turning the afternoon into twilight. I was in her room, cleaning the windows, when the first drops of rain hit the glass. "Looks like a bad one," Margaret said from her desk. "Yeah," I agreed, watching the clouds churn. The rain came harder, pounding against the house. The wind howled. Thunder rumbled in the distance, getting closer. Then suddenly, the lights flickered and went out. The room was plunged into deep gray darkness. I gasped, my hand flying to my chest. I'd always been afraid of storms. "It's all right." Margaret's voice came through the darkness, steady and calm. "This happens a lot out here. I have candles." I heard her moving across the room, opening drawers. There was the scratch of a match, and then a small flame bloomed to life. She lit 2 thick candles, and warm, flickering light pushed back the shadows. Her face glowed in the candlelight, softer than I'd ever seen it. She brought 1 candle over to the small table between the 2 chairs by the window. "Sit," she said gently. I obeyed, sinking into the chair. My cleaning was forgotten. The rules about employer and employee were forgotten. The storm had shrunk our world down to just this room, just this candlelight, just the 2 of us. Margaret sat across from me, and for a long moment, we just listened to the rain hammer against the windows. "I bought this house with Daniel," she said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. "He loved how isolated it was. He said the quiet helped him think." She stared into the candle flame, and I could see the pain etched into her face. "After he died," she continued, "I found I couldn't stand the quiet. It was like the silence was screaming at me. So I filled the house with things. Art, books, furniture. I thought if I filled all the empty spaces, I wouldn't notice how alone I was." She finally looked at me, and her eyes were shining with unshed tears. But it only made it worse. The silence got louder. My own throat tightened. I knew that feeling. I knew it so well. "When I lost everything," I said, my voice shaking. "When I had nowhere to go, the worst part wasn't being broke or homeless. It was the loneliness. It felt like I was the last person on earth." Margaret nodded slowly. "Yes," she breathed. "Exactly that." The storm crashed around us, but inside that circle of candlelight, everything was still. She reached out, her hand moving across the small space between our chairs. She didn't take my hand. She just rested her fingers on the arm of my chair, inches from my own hand. My heart stopped. That small gesture felt enormous, like the most important thing that had ever happened. The space between our hands felt electric. I could feel the warmth of her skin without even touching. Every nerve in my body was screaming at me to close that gap, to reach out, to lace my fingers through hers. But I was frozen, terrified. This was my employer. This was a woman still grieving. This was wrong, wasn't it? But in the candlelight, with the storm raging outside, nothing felt wrong. It felt like the most right thing in the world. My hand trembled. Slowly, So slowly, I uncurled my fingers and laid my hand flat on the armrest, palm up. An invitation. A question. Please, I thought. Please see me. For a long, terrible moment, she didn't move. I saw the war in her eyes, fear and desire fighting each other. Then she moved. Her fingers brushed against mine, so light I almost thought I'd imagined it. And then she took my hand. Her fingers threaded through mine, hesitant at first, then tightening. Her hand was cool and soft and perfect. I couldn't breathe. Tears spilled down my cheeks without permission. We sat like that as the storm slowly died down, our hands clasped between us, the candle burning low. No words, just touch, just connection, just two lonely people finding something they'd been searching for. When the power suddenly came back on, the lights flooding the room with harsh brightness, we both jumped. Our hands flew apart. Reality crashed back in. She was Margaret Ross, the lady of the house. I was Sarah, the hired help. The moment was over. I barely slept that night. I lay in my small bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment over and over. The feel of her hand in mine, the way she'd looked at me in the candlelight, the connection that had felt so real, so powerful. Had I imagined it? Had I read too much into a simple gesture of comfort during a storm? By morning, I'd convinced myself I'd ruined everything. I'd crossed a line. She would be cold and distant now. Maybe she'd even fire me. Where would I go? What would I do? I knocked on her door at 8 o'clock, my stomach in knots.
"Come in," she called.
I pushed the door open, ready for rejection, ready for the wall to be back up between us. But Margaret wasn't at her desk. She was standing by the unmade bed, holding 2 coffee mugs. She looked at me, and I saw my own fear reflected in her eyes. She was scared too. Scared of what we'd felt. Scared of what it meant. "Coffee?" she asked quietly. That one word was a question that asked 1,000 things. "Do you want to pretend last night didn't happen? Or do you want to see where this goes? Are you brave enough to cross that line with me?" I could have said no. I could have mumbled an excuse and kept my head down and done my job. It would have been safer. But I was so tired of being safe. And I was so tired of being alone. I closed the door behind me and walked toward her. I took the mug from her hands, and when our fingers brushed, that same electric spark shot through me. "Thank you, Margaret," I said, using her first name deliberately, making a choice.
Her whole face relaxed.
A small, real smile touched her lips. "I was thinking," she said, looking down at her coffee. "The garden is a disaster. I was wondering if you might want to spend more time out there with me, working on it together." I understood what she was really asking. She was asking if we could spend more time together. Not as employer and employee, but as 2 people trying to figure out what they meant to each other. "I'd like that," I said. And so we began. We spent every afternoon in the garden, working side by side. We talked about everything. Our childhoods, our dreams, our fears. She told me about her years teaching at the university, how she'd loved the students, but eventually the noise had become too much. I told her about my dream of writing stories, how I'd given up because I didn't think I was good enough. "You should write again," she said one day, her hands deep in the soil. "You're good with words. I can tell." "How can you tell?" I asked, surprised. "The way you talk," she said, glancing at me. "You paint pictures. You make me see things." No one had ever said anything like that to me before. My eyes stung with tears. The line between us kept blurring. We'd brush against each other reaching for the same tool. Our hands would touch passing a water bottle. She'd tuck a strand of hair behind my ear when the wind blew it across my face, and the tenderness of that gesture would make my heart ache. I lived for those touches. I lived for the moments when she'd laugh at something I said. I lived for the quiet evenings when we'd sit together and read, just existing in the same space. But we never talked about what was happening between us. We never named it. Until one night, about 3 months after I'd arrived. We'd spent the day planting new rose bushes, and we were exhausted and dirty. We made a simple dinner together, soup and bread, and ate at the kitchen table like it was the most natural thing in the world. After dinner, she didn't go to her office to work like usual. She looked at me and said, "Come upstairs with me?" My pulse quickened. Okay. We climbed the stairs together, and when we reached her room, she didn't turn on the bright, overhead light. She switched on the small lamp on her desk, the one that cast everything in soft, warm gold. She walked to the window and looked out at the garden we'd been working on together. I stayed near the door, my heart pounding so hard I was sure she could hear it. "Sarah," she said, not turning around.
"This. Us.
What we have." She paused, and I held my breath. "I don't want you to be here as my employee anymore." The words hit me like ice water. She was letting me go. I'd been right. I'd read everything wrong. I'd ruined it. "I understand," I managed to say, though my voice was breaking. "I'll pack my things."
"No."
She spun around, her eyes wide. She crossed the room in 3 quick steps and took my face in her hands.
"No, Sarah."
"That's not what I mean." Her thumb stroked my cheeks, and I couldn't breathe. "I mean, I don't want that to be why you're here," she said, her voice fierce and gentle at once. "I don't want you here because you need a job or a place to stay. I want you here because you want to be with me, because this is what you choose." The words hung in the air between us, terrifying and beautiful.
She was giving me a choice.
She was asking me to stay not out of necessity, but out of love. I looked into Margaret's gray eyes, and I saw my entire future there. I saw mornings drinking coffee together. I saw afternoons working in the garden, watching things we planted together grow. I saw quiet evenings reading side by side. I saw laughter and tears and ordinary days that would feel extraordinary because we were together. I saw home. "I'm not here for the job, Margaret," I whispered. "I haven't been for a long time." Her eyes filled with tears. "You're sure?" she asked, her voice breaking. "I'm older. I'm broken. I'm still figuring out how to be a person again. Are you sure you want this?" I reached up and covered her hands with mine, pressing them against my face. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. She let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. And then she leaned in and pressed her forehead against mine. We stood like that for a long time, just breathing each other in. It felt like coming home after being lost for years. "I love you," she whispered against my skin. "I love you too," I said back. And saying it out loud felt like unlocking something inside me. Like I could finally breathe all the way. She pulled back just enough to look at me, and she was smiling. Really smiling. It transformed her whole face, made her look younger, lighter.
"Stay," she said.
"Not in the attic room. Here. With me." "Okay," I said, laughing through my tears.
"Yes."
"Okay." That night, I moved my few belongings from the tiny attic room into Margaret's bedroom. Our bedroom now. It felt surreal, like a dream I was afraid I'd wake up from. But the morning came, and I woke up in her bed, with sunlight streaming through the windows and her hand in mine. She was still there. This was real. The months that followed were the happiest of my life. We fell into new rhythms. We still had coffee every morning, but now I was in bed, talking about what we wanted to do that day. The house started to feel different. Margaret began playing music, something she said she hadn't done since Daniel died. We cooked together, making messes in the kitchen and laughing about our failures. The garden flourished. We planted vegetables and flowers, and watching them grow felt like watching our love grow. Something that started small and tender, becoming stronger and more beautiful with care. I started writing again. Margaret set up a small desk for me in the corner of our room, by the other window. She'd work on her own projects, and I'd write my stories, and sometimes we'd look up at the same moment and just smile at each other. She encouraged me to submit my work to magazines. When I got my first acceptance letter, she took me into the city to celebrate. We had dinner at a nice restaurant, and she held my hand across the table, right there in public. I was so happy, I thought my heart might burst. We had hard days too. Days when Margaret would get quiet and distant, lost in memories of Daniel. I learned not to take it personally, To just be there, to hold her when she needed to be held and give her space when she needed to be alone. She helped me too, when my own demons came back. When I'd wake up panicking, sure that this couldn't last, that I'd lose everything again. She'd pull me close and remind me that I was safe, that we were building this together. On a sunny morning in May, almost a year after I'd first knocked on her door, we were having breakfast in the garden. The roses we'd planted were blooming, filling the air with their sweet scent. "I never thought I'd be happy again," Margaret said suddenly, looking around at the garden, at the house, at me. "After Daniel died, I thought that part of my life was over. And now?" I asked softly. She reached across the table and took my hand. "Now I know that love doesn't work the way I thought. It's not one great love per lifetime. It's not a limited resource. The heart is bigger than that, more generous." Tears pricked my eyes. "He'd be happy for you," I said. "For us." "I think he would," she agreed. "He always wanted me to be happy. He'd probably like you." She smiled. "You both preferred the quiet." We sat in comfortable silence, holding hands, listening to the birds sing. "Thank you," I said eventually. "For what?" "For seeing me," I said. "When I showed up here, I was invisible, even to myself. But you saw me. You made me real again." Margaret squeezed my hand. "You did the same for me. I was a ghost in this house, haunting my own life. You brought me back." I looked at the house, at this place that had seemed so cold and lonely when I first arrived. Now it was filled with warmth, with music and laughter and love. "It's funny," I said. "I came here looking for a job, just somewhere to sleep and a way to survive." "And what did you find?" Margaret asked, though I could see in her eyes that she already knew. "Home," I said simply. "I found home." She stood up and pulled me into her arms, and I rested my head against her shoulder, listening to her heartbeat. The wind rustled through the garden. The sun was warm on our faces, and I knew, deep in my bones, that I was exactly where I was meant to be. Sometimes you have to lose everything to find what you've been searching for all along. Sometimes home isn't a place. Sometimes it's a person. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, it's both.